Hello, and welcome to Fostering Connections with the Natural World, a Biophilic Cities webinar series. I'm Amanda Beck, a research associate with the Biophilic Cities project at the University of Virginia. Through this series, we will hear from practitioners and researchers who are creating healthier communities, healthier landscapes, and healthier people through increased connections with nature. Biophilic Cities project started at UVA in 2011 to explore and advance nature in cities. In the fall of 2013, we launched the Global Biophilic Cities Network, with partner cities spanning the globe from San Francisco, California, Wellington, New Zealand, and Singapore. This series is one way the Biophilic Cities project aims to share knowledge about the innovative work of cities, organizations, and individuals around the world who are championing biophilic design. To see the full schedule of topics and to register for an upcoming webinar, please visit our website at www.biophiliccities.org/registration. Today we will hear from Yvonne Lynch, who is an urban climate adaptation policy expert and the team leader for the City of Melbourne Urban Ecology and Urban Forest team. Lynch has led some of the most progressive climate change policies and initiatives for Melbourne, including the implementation of the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, and securing a legislative amendment to initiate Australia's first environmental upgrade agreement. Several projects under her direction have received awards from the United Nations Association of Australia, the Banksia Foundation, and from the C40 Cities program. Lynch will speak for 30 minutes to be followed by questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm really happy to be joining you this morning to share our story from Melbourne. And I guess what I'm going to talk through reflects many years of work, but also the work of many people here at the City of Melbourne. So to start off with, we've created a vision that we're working to, a very strong and powerful vision, we believe, in our city, that we want to create a city within a forest rather than having, I guess, a few trees within our city. And that's our long-term goal. But in terms of putting that vision in place, we had many challenges that brought us to that point. And we're also going to face many challenges in terms of achieving this vision. By way of background, for those of you who are not familiar with the Australian context, we think here that our key challenge in terms of looking into the future is heat, and how we manage that and deal with it is really going to affect how we can achieve what we would like in terms of creating a city within a forest for Melbourne. Our municipality, and you can see there on the screen, it's that yellow map, that's a heat map of our city, and you can see it's fairly hot. We've got the urban heat island effect that we experience quite intensely throughout the year here in Melbourne. We're normally up to 7 degrees Celsius warmer than some of our surrounding areas. And as you can see from the map at the bottom there of Australia, heat is becoming an increasing challenge. We're getting warmer into the future. And from a city management perspective, one of the things that we're most concerned about is heat-related stress and mortality. So in terms of metropolitan Melbourne, in our last 2 heat waves, we've lost an enormous amount of lives. So in our 2009 heat wave, 374 people lost their lives. And last year, 2014 heat wave, we had up to 143 people dying of heat-related stress in metropolitan Melbourne. And I guess the point is that heat is a serious but silent killer, and that is one of the motivations behind why City of Melbourne has moved towards creating a city within the forest. We're looking at creating, I guess, a cool city. In terms of the background of where we got to this, what you see on the screen there is a map of the City of Melbourne municipality. Within that, each little green dot there, and they're all slightly merging into each other. Each green dot represents a tree within our city. And back in 2009, what we realized, we were in the midst of a 13-year drought in Melbourne. And we started to think about, well, you know, and we had been thinking about it for a while, how do we manage this drought, and what was the most effective thing to do to, I guess, best use our potable water supplies. And one of the decisions that we made back then was to actually stop watering the city's landscapes. And I guess if you think about it in terms of climate change, this was an early climate adaptation action for the city. And we really didn't realize the consequences until we went out and actually looked at our city's trees and saw large-scale decline occurring. So you can see there on this map, every tree that's not green now is a tree that we're actually going to lose from our city in the next 15 to 20 years. We're looking at about 40% loss of the city's trees. And that's purely down to the fact that we had not realized during the drought what turning off our water supplies would mean. And this is, I think, a challenge that many cities are looking at right now. And I guess if you could look at places like Los Angeles or Sao Paulo, all in the midst of really extreme droughts. And, you know, from a policy perspective, we need to be considering what does it mean when we take one single action? What are the consequences of that action? So just to put that in context, this is Fitzroy Gardens in City of Melbourne. One of the, we've got, I guess, the world's last standing boulevards and avenues of elms here in Melbourne. They haven't been affected by Dutch elm disease. And here's what we're losing by turning those taps off. This is Royal Parade, again, one of the world's last standing boulevards of elms. And here's what we're looking at happening to that boulevard in the next 5 to 7 years. And there's one context you can think of that as, you know, a dramatic loss of trees, but it's also a huge loss of cultural identity for Melbourne. So to put it in context in our thinking, we, during our drought, had enough water falling across metropolitan Melbourne to meet our needs, but we weren't capturing it. We were letting it run off our city surfaces. So this is an image of Burke Street Mall in the very centre of Melbourne, and you can see that very shiny blue stone is just really effective at conducting the rainwater into the drains and out to the bay. And this is what the bottom of our Yarra River is looking like. So we recognized this, and we've spent a lot of time working on how we can better work with nature in the city. And that's led us to this approach, which is just really simply outlined on this slide. We've put in place an ecosystem-based climate adaptation program. And over the past few years, we've spent over 50 million investing in green infrastructure for the city. So we've put in place an urban forest strategy. We have an aim to double the city's canopy cover. So we're not just looking at responding to that loss that are projected would occur, but also we're looking to increase the canopy over time. So we think that if we can take our canopy cover from 20% up to 40% canopy cover across the city, alongside increasing our permeability and having a secure, non-potable supply of water for our landscape, then we could actually cool our city by 4 degrees Celsius. And that's really significant if we think about how we're warming into the future and the challenges we face. We feel that a nature-based approach to climate adaptation is the way to go for us. And it's obviously going to deliver many benefits for both people and our environment. In terms of green space, we're looking at increasing the green space in the city as well by almost 8%. So I'll run you through how we're looking at achieving that. In terms of doubling the canopy cover, this is that picture on the ground from Fitzroy Gardens, which I showed you earlier. You can see that we've begun to plant new trees. Each year we're planting 3,000 trees across the city, and we're not just thinking, I guess, in terms of numbers. We're thinking about how we achieve maximum canopy cover in the city. So this slide shows you a street in North Melbourne, and on the right-hand side of the screen you can see perhaps a traditional approach to urban street tree planting, and that's putting trees in the footpath where they often have conflict in terms of space to grow, interference with the surrounding infrastructure. And you can see from this slide, if we wanted to increase canopy in this street, we could go in and put a total, say, of 26 trees in that street and achieve a canopy cover of about 13%. But if we see the street differently, if we put the trees in the road, in the parking bays, we can actually only plant 12 trees but achieve a canopy cover of 55%. But what that means is you're losing 3 car parking spaces. So that's conversations with our residents and our community in terms of talking about what the benefits of canopy cover and urban greening are, so that we can negotiate some of these outcomes. In terms of how we're more effectively looking at delivering water to trees, we've developed these tree pit rain gardens, or what we call water-sensitive urban design tree pits. These help more effectively capture water from the pavements, and they clean that water and irrigate the trees more effectively, but they also reduce the number of pollutants that we're sending out into the river, the local river. In terms of how we're looking at increasing permeability, here you can see a street where we're putting in structural soil into the parking bays, and when we put the asphalt over, it will be permeable. So we're actually looking at how we can increase evapotranspiration across the city and more effectively deliver water to trees by making our surfaces permeable. And there's many cities doing this. This is one street that we've recently completed, Collins Street, one of our city's premier boulevards. And you can see there that we've actually commissioned permeable bluestone pavers to match with the surrounding, I guess, urban design aesthetic, but still provide those environmental benefits. Melbourne, if anybody's been here, you'll know that we're famous for our laneways, and we have a culture of converting our laneways into cafe hotspots, shall I say. But this is I guess, one example of how we're treating laneways differently. We've taken that laneway, we've looked at the opportunity for greening, put in not just trees, but you can see vertical walls, and also water-sensitive urban design treatment. This is not what the site is looking like right now. This is hopefully what it'll be looking like in the next 5 years, but those new trees have gone in, and we're currently undertaking a laneway assessment for every laneway in the city to understand how we can green it. This is an image of our Royal Park and the wetlands. We've got a stormwater harvesting tank, and we're capturing and reusing rainfall and stormwater at this location, and we're essentially now able to provide water to not just this park that you can see, and this park contains a golf course and it's several sporting facilities as well as the park itself. We're actually watering the surrounding boulevards too. We've developed a program whereby we're looking to increase our stormwater harvesting capacity around the city. So right now, with the addition of this facility here, which is our stormwater harvesting tank at Fitzroy Gardens, we've now brought online a capacity to source 25% of our city's landscape irrigation requirements from stormwater harvesting interventions. And I think that's pretty significant if you reflect back on where we were at the point during the drought where we didn't have water to water our landscapes. We're actively and progressively seeking to implement solutions like this where we can. And you can see this street here is Darling Street in East Melbourne, and underneath that median in the middle of the road we have a stormwater tank underneath. So these interventions, most of our community, unless they've been part of the process, if they walk by, they don't even know that they're there. But they're doing a really, really effective job for us. In terms of how we're increasing green space and permeability, this is an example of a recent project, and we've got several more in the pipeline like this. This is Errol Street in North Melbourne, and you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we've basically got a lot of road in that image, and we have about 500 square meters of, I guess, green in that image. And what we've done is we've looked at our city from the context of how it's used. This is a site that we identified was underutilized in terms of the vehicle traffic on it. So we basically just dug up the asphalt and created a new city park. And I think for a city like Melbourne that is already quite densely developed, we're having to look at opportunities like this where we can repurpose our existing infrastructure. So it's not about, I guess, if we want to create a very strong green network in the city, there are plenty of opportunities, and it's not about thinking about, I guess, our spaces as having to stay the same as they've always been. It's about looking at how we can meet our emerging needs in innovative ways. We're also starting to think about our parks as potential flood mitigants. So when we do these projects, we know that although in Melbourne we're facing a heat problem and also drought issues into the future, we know that when it does rain, it's going to rain intensely. So how do we manage flood problems? Do we need to build more drains in our city? Or is there other ways we can look at it? And what we're working on at the moment with the University of Melbourne here is developing an integrated climate adaptation model that can help us validate the, I guess, effectiveness of green infrastructure interventions at certain locations in our city for flood management, as well as for heat and drought management. We've developed also with University of Melbourne and several other councils Australia's first technical guidelines to establish green roofs. I think this is something that's quite common in the US, but not so much in Australia. And what we're looking at doing with this is essentially trying to incentivize and assist building owners throughout the city to look at greening the private realm. This is one of our own green roofs that we've recently established up in one of our community centres, and it's a biodiversity green roof. So you can see this is just a small selection of what we have on that one space. So we're, I guess, trying to work more along that context of using every space in our city and seeing it differently. This is an image of Irvan Ma, and a standard, you can see there, turf and grass treatment, and we have many turf and grass treatments around our city. So again, we're asking ourselves, can we treat these spaces differently? Can we enhance biodiversity? Can we look at how we manage these spaces? And we've gone into that space and created a wildflower meadow. So we have a piece of work underway at the moment to understand what are these opportunity spaces in the city, and how can we maximize them and get something that from an ecological perspective is more beneficial. In terms of this work and how we are working alongside our community, we have very much, I guess that program of work represents a few years that I've talked you through, but how we've got to that point in terms of developing our strategies and putting in place these outcomes on the ground is really, we've been running a program of public participation with our community. So you can see on screen the public participation spectrum. And I guess the space, the reason I've put it in there is that we're deliberately trying to work in a space of involving, collaborating and empowering our community in terms of making the decisions for Melbourne. And this is very much supported by our Lord Mayor and our city's councillors. They see urban greening in terms of 100-year decisions that we're making. They're not I guess restricting decisions to political cycles. And we've done a lot of community outreach. We've used artists and art competitions to start to drive that public awareness about the importance of urban forest. On all of our projects, we use online forums to allow our community to co-develop our projects with us, and we also workshop with our community regularly. So over the past 4 or 5 years, we've now been running regular workshops where they showed you at the very beginning of the presentation. Essentially, you can query any tree in the city, but you can also email any tree in the city. So we've got 77,000 trees that now have email addresses, and what we expected was that we would have, I guess, a dialogue or a conversation with our community around expected tree loss and concerns. But the really interesting thing that's happened with this map has been that we've received thousands of emails, love letters to our trees, and too many to even talk about. This is just one of our most emailed trees in the city, actually. And amongst that sentiment that's coming in from the community, there's, apart from expressing love for trees, people are starting to acknowledge and recognize benefits of trees, and they're also starting to share memories with the trees. We've had not just people from Melbourne writing to our trees, but from all around the world. Last week we had a 350-year-old oak tree in Milwaukee write to an oak tree in Melbourne. So people are really captivated by this ability to connect with the trees. And it might sound strange for some people, but I think one of the things that it's highlighted for us here is that there's often this perception, perhaps, that technology is takes us away from nature. And I think what we've seen is this is an example of technology connecting people to nature and helping them recognize it. So it's an interesting conversation that we're having at the moment about, well, what's the role in terms of technology and ecology working together for our city. And that brings me to the final piece of work that we're doing. We're writing an urban ecology strategy at the moment. So we started off with a BioBlitz last October to start to work with the city community to collect data and create a species inventory, which we don't currently have. So we ran about 52 events over 2 weeks, and we managed to collect 3,000 data points and identify 500 species across the city. And you can see that's an example of what we found. This information was collected right across the city, and I was really excited to see that people weren't just looking in the parks for biodiversity. They were looking in the streets, they were looking on the rooftops, they were looking in all of those unexpected places, which is fantastic because often, you know, the biodiversity in our city is often invisible. So we were really quite excited by what came back. And what we've just recently done has been to release a discussion paper. We've called it Unleashing the Potential of Nature. And what we're doing now is we're asking our community to work with us and collaborate to develop our urban ecology strategy. And you can see that the discussion paper there is available on our Participate Melbourne website. There's a link on screen. And it's really just a kind of a touchstone to start a conversation, which we hope will lead us to developing a document that's reflective of our community's desires. So I might wrap up there and see if anybody has any questions. Thank you for this opportunity to share our work through the network.
Thank you, Yvonne. Someone asked, how do people in the city feel about policies to enhance urban ecology as far as putting budget money, city money, towards street trees or permeable pavers versus other government services or infrastructure projects? Is that an issue? Because they mentioned that they feel it's an issue in other communities, and I've definitely seen that in our own little city here.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. We've been working to look at how we articulate the benefits of these services. So if you're looking at investing in a single infrastructure or a single project, then what are the outcomes and what are the benefits for the community? And we've been working hard to articulate the benefits of urban greening. So I guess if you look at a drain, it's a single purpose use. If you look at any green infrastructure, whether that, and what we mean by green infrastructure in Melbourne is that's urban forest, open spaces, stormwater harvesting, permeable paving, wetlands, everything that provides ecosystem services or contributes or enhances that provision. So I think our community are at a point where we've worked through many conversations, public, open, transparent conversations, to understand what it is that people value, and they really value the urban forest. And so in terms of making a business case for permeable pavers versus other government services, well, we're talking about not just supplying water to keep a tree in the landscape. We're talking about the ability to cool our city into the future. We're talking about increasing the health and well-being of our community, and all of those many other ecosystem services that green infrastructure provides. So we are challenging the approach to traditional return on investment projects for services, and we're challenging the way people think about services. What we need to do into the future as a local government is to look at multifunctional projects. We need to be getting multiple benefits from the work that we do and the investments that we put in. And we do have one piece of work underway at the moment. We've just finished our green paper, but we're developing an economic framework to better value green infrastructure. So that's something we're hoping to share, not just with our own leaders, but also those other councils and governments around our state.
I think that's a really good point to build off of a project or a ecosystem service that the public is already connected to. So, but I wanted to sort of jump off of what you said about cooling the city into the future. Is Melbourne trying to use the Yarra River for evaporative cooling to deal with the heat island effect, or is it thinking about blue infrastructure as well as green infrastructure?
Look, we are thinking about blue infrastructure as well as green infrastructure. I think in terms of our terminology, we kind of talk about both as green for some reason, but in terms of how we're looking at working with, I guess, we're looking at the city holistically and trying to understand, well, what's the best way to deliver the best outcomes. So in terms of how we're looking at the Yarra, we're looking at firstly managing the water that we send in there and making sure it's clean. And we're doing that through a variety of mechanisms, such as the water-sensitive urban design tree pits and also the stormwater harvesting network. But we're starting to think differently about the stormwater harvesting network to understand, you know, how it can just not just I guess help with evapotranspirative cooling, but also to help with flood management too. So in terms of, are we extracting water from the Yarra to irrigate our landscapes? No, we're trying to capture through water-sensitive urban design and stormwater harvesting the water before it goes into the river and create what we describe as a water-sensitive city to achieve that evapotranspirative potential.
Fantastic. The interactive urban forest map you showed is a really cool idea. Has the city considered crowdsourcing new locations for trees in the city based upon resident suggestions? I guess what I mean is the map interactive enough where people can place a pin and say, my neighborhood needs another tree here?
Yes, we are doing that. So we're crowdsourcing, I guess, in two ways. So we have, I guess, two websites. One of them is Participate Melbourne. You can see it there on that slide on the screen. We have an urban forest page within that, and we have a map with the ability to allow the community to say where they want trees or say where they would like an intervention, a green intervention within the city. We're doing that precinct by precinct, so we've got 11 precincts in our city. So we've done that already for 7 of our precincts over the last 4 years. We've collected their feedback via online mapping and also online conversational forums, but also we're meeting with them, holding workshops at the weekends and in the evenings to work with them physically through maps and in workshop spaces too. So yeah, 2 approaches to that.
Awesome. I'm starting to think that the intersection of modern technology and connecting with nature, that this is where we're going to reinvigorate a whole new generation of people into getting outside.
I think so.
I hope so. Do you, considering the fact that you just recently got done doing a BioBlitz, do you have any maybe recommendations or words of wisdom for cities that also want to do their own BioBlitz? Absolutely.
Actually, we've just published a blog on the lessons and the learnings from the Melbourne BioBlitz on the nature of cities this week. I guess in terms of how we undertook the BioBlitz here in Melbourne, we put in place a partnership model to deliver that I guess event, if you like. We worked with our local museum, Museum Victoria. We also worked with many of our universities around the city and also Melbourne Zoo, and pretty much anybody who was interested in this space was invited to come in and join us. We didn't try and own it or run it all by ourselves, and by developing that partnership we actually opened access to our community to the amazing ecology expertise that resides, behind closed doors in our city. And our universities and our museums are doing so much amazing work. And through that partnership, we achieved something that was that worked really, really well for us, and has, I guess, inspired a lot of new thinking and new work. In terms of the community, we didn't expect the level of excitement, enthusiasm or engagement that we received. We thought that people would be interested, but what we found was that people were, there was a lot of acknowledgement of the fact that they never would have looked if they hadn't heard about the BioBlitz. So we had many amateur naturalists who said, look, I'd never come into the city to look for insects. I'd go to the bush to do that, and they were amazed with what they found. But then there was many people who I guess have an innate connection with nature but hadn't acknowledged that, and then were amazed by what they found. And they started to see the city in a very different way. And I guess one of the things that I advocate for with these type of events is don't just focus on the park, and make sure that you get people into the streets and into the other urban spaces so that they can uncover what's in those spaces just by looking at them closely. So that's been really exciting.
Can you explain a little bit about the projects that you've discussed? Are these interdepartmental collaborations, or is there a dedicated department that acts as a leader to start these and see them through? In terms of, it's not so much interdepartmental collaboration, but interorganizational, I guess. The collaboration was initiated by my team, and I guess we've been working with many of the ecologists in the city, in terms of bringing in their expertise for issues relating to what we determine for policies and strategies. But understanding their level of interest was really the trigger for us to reach out to them and say, would you like to do this event for us or with us, and here's what we think is in it for you in terms of potential new research, new data, and understanding our city in a different way. So yeah, it's the first time we've done it, and it was so successful that people were asking when the next one was happening before the first day had finished, and this thing ran for 2 weeks. So I think going forward we're looking at how we would undertake our next BioBlitz in terms of what timing should we be looking at. Do we need to be looking at smaller, more seasonal BioBlitzes, and how do we run them, and how do we fund them across our organizations collectively? So yeah, that's a space that we're still developing. Great.
And I've just shared the link to Nature of Cities the blog that we've written, and some of the partners have written that with me. So I think if anybody's interested in the detail, you'll find it on that blog.
Yvonne, thank you so much for joining us. I think you have sold me on moving to Melbourne. This is exactly the type of city I want to live in, with green laneways and active policies to instate blue and green infrastructure. And then you're talking about annual BioBlitzes. What you and the urban ecology and urban forest team are providing is a great and comprehensive model for other cities that want to emulate such policies. So thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for everyone who joined us today. Stick with us for the next webinar, which is Wednesday, March 18th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be hearing from Wallace J. Nichols, who will talk about the remarkable effects of being in and near water.